Awesome, and without further ado, I now invite up the first speaker of the Affirmative team to kick off this debate.
At the point that we allow people to take their religion and allow it to motivate them to do positive acts that fundamentally benefit society, rather than being driven to the extremes by the promise of eternal happiness after their death, that is the point at which we win this debate. I'm going to start with some setup. I'm then going to move into our 2 points. Firstly, on why we get more extreme religious action, and secondly, on why we get more positive religious acts than everyday society. So, starting with some setup, 2 pieces for you. Firstly, we think that religious acts on the whole tend to be relatively good and quite positive for society. We think they look like, giving to charity, being kind to people, being supportive to people, doing things which fundamentally contribute to society, right? We think basically this because religions which make people do good things lead to good societies, lead to stronger religions, which tend to spread. Right, second piece of setup then, we think that religion and belief tends to take 2 forms or some combination of these forms. First is action-based, where you're driven to do positive actions, and secondly there's belief-based, where you just have to believe and you get the rewards. We think that, devotion within the motion can refer to either of these 2. We think we prefer action-based. We're going to tell you why we get far more of that on our side. Right, moving then into our first point on extreme religions. So, context here, we think in many cases people give up their lives or give up the happiness of their lives to religious causes. We think in the worst case, this looks like terrorists being willing to go to prison in order to, commit an act of religious terrorism. We think in the slightly less worst case, this looks like people being willing to put their life on the line in religious wars. And we think in a further case, this looks like just nuns and people who are willing to give up a lot of their lives in order to, try and to fulfill their religion. Okay, so we think that all of these things are driven by the idea that it doesn't, everything you do in your life is simply to serve the purpose of your religion, because after your death, that is when you have, infinite happiness that far outweighs anything that happens right now. We think that when we remove the idea of benefits after your death, that narrative simply stops existing, right? It now means that during life, people aren't driven to do all of these things because their benefits inherently come within their lifetimes, right? If they're doing religious acts, it has to be giving to charity, it has to be building relations with people, because that is where they reap the benefits within their lifetimes. They're not going to give up their whole lives to religions. Right. What then are the outcomes of this? We think that what this means is that we just have more people living more fulfilling lives, living lives where they are connecting with others, where they are, building fulfillment for other people. We think this looks like where people who would, otherwise have been doing very productive things that have a massive benefit to society, who instead gave their lives up for these religious causes, are now able to do these things, bringing all of these benefits, right? They're able to be scientists, they're able to be business people, they're able to contribute massively to society. Thirdly, and we think this is quite big, we just have far less terrorism, we have far less religious wars. We think this is particularly true because there is a flow-on effect of as soon as you start to remove the things motivating certain people within these groups, you start to change the culture in these groups, you start to understand these groups, understanding what their religion is. This has very quick, very massive flow-on effects. We think that this is really important within this debate because the harms here are so significant, especially on the level of individuals, especially on the level of individuals who are highly related to their religion, so we have a lot of power over. Before I move on, I'll take a POI if there is one.
How many people are religious extremists?
We think that, as much as that may be a small portion of the population, the effect that these religious extremists have on like loads of people around them is very big, right? It only takes a few people to commit an act of religious terrorism that significantly worsens the lives of hundreds to thousands of people. We think the impacts of these people, we think the change we have on them is very, very powerful. Right, moving then into our second point on why we have more positive religious acts, right? So, firstly, why do we think it's more likely that people are going to be believing in action-based religions now, where they're encouraged to commit actions? Why we think this is because when you commit a positive action under religion, the world rewards your behavior. We think this is for two reasons. We firstly think just when you are charitable, other people likely like you more, right? Your boss finds you more likable, they give you a promotion, your relationships with other people increase, you feel like you're doing better in life, you're doing more well. You're doing better. Secondly, we think you just feel better and like yourself more because you feel good having done this positive action. This is something that makes you feel like there is some connection between you doing this positive act and now the payoff that you're getting for that within your life. We think this isn't as true, but we think that this isn't true for belief-based religions where you just have to believe really hard and there's going to be some positive action because you don't actually have these two mechanisms that are giving you this reinforcement. Therefore, religions that have these action-based ideas are more likely to succeed, you're more likely to be doing good actions. Right. Two further mechanisms then on why these positive feedback loops mean that now that you're in an action-based religion, you're more likely to, when you do these actions, be rewarded for it. Firstly, we think that people just generally look for omens around them that reinforce their ideas about their religions, that reinforce these things, right? We think that when you do a good thing, you're suddenly going to be looking around and going, what's going to happen to me now? Where's my reward going to be? More than likely, simply out of coincidence, you're going to find that reward, something good is going to happen, you're going to be able to go, oh look, that's my reward, I did this good thing, I should do it again. This reinforces your religion, this reinforces you giving back to society. Secondly, we think other people are also going to reinforce this, they're going to encourage you and be like, yeah, that was definitely the result of that, that wasn't a coincidence, especially your religious leaders who are incentivized to do this because it supports their religion, because over time religions that do this are going to be more successful. Same mix as I talked about before. Right. What does this then mean? It means that you are more likely to do positive things within society because when you do these things, you get these signs telling you did really well. I think also the converse is also very true, that when you do things that detract from society, that detract from your lives, that detract from the people around you, you're probably going to feel worse off, they're probably going to treat you worse, you're probably going to get worse things, you're also going to see these omens. What this means is you're basically just, very incentivized to do things that contribute to society. You're very incentivized to give to charity, to be understanding of people, to be a gracious person, to connect with others. We think the reason this is so important is because it applies across lots of different people. We think that every religious person who we can now put under a religion that has this idea of reward within your lifetime is now far more likely to do positive things, to contribute to society. We end up with a better society for everyone. We think that is a really big benefit we can claim, and we think we can also win that debate there. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the first speaker of the Negating team.
on our side of the house, religion becomes a conditional rather than part of being a faithful thing that we see as so important, and we do not stand for this. Firstly, in the speech, I'm going to go over points of setup, then do one quick point of clarification, and then go on to first point around how people will view religion and their relationship with religion, and then on to my second point around the incentives of impacts on devotion. So firstly, on to points of setup. We want this devotion to religion in order to promote people placing the interests of others highly and doing these other positive acts that Af is telling you about. We agree on this. We also want to establish that with these rewards, when they are given, also comes the punishment, which is the counterpart of these rewards. This is important to establish, and it is also part of the debate. It has a place in this debate. Now, I just want to say here that Af is trying to walk a very wobbly line when they tell you about being extremist for one thing, but then also having an incentive to do enough for this. I think that they need to have a much better idea of painting a picture and clearing up where that line sits, when we can actually get that incentive, but not push too far, and how that actually works on that side of the house, how this line works better on that side of the house than they have done for us right now, because I don't think that's sufficient. Right now, onto my first point around how people view religion. Firstly, around some context. People's lives are incredibly complex. There are ups and downs, periods of good and times of bad. This means, under their side, these are the times where you think that these times you will think that you're either in the God's favour or out of God's favour, depending on what is happening in your life. We think that this can be very detrimental to the individual. So why is this actually true? Firstly, because it is seen as an empirically true thing, an empirically judgment of your actions, in a way that there's no other basis of why things are happening to you. This faith that we see at the point in time where you're actually being taught these and you're attending religious studies, you're clearly deeply religious, and this faith that we see here is an element of religion, which means you have to operate with the total of this blind trust. This means that you want to be able to look for any signs that they give you, any indication about if your prayers are being heard. You will take anything as a sign. We see this as very harmful, of not focusing on your actual life and constantly being worried about, oh, does this mean I'm in God's favour? Does it not? How does this impact now what I'm going to do? We see this as super harmful. Secondly, because people also place a high emphasis on religion, they interpret everything as being related to whether or not it is an event of a reward or a punishment. Thirdly, because religion is seen as a form of control over your life, it isn't, because in an unpredictable world, you're putting your faith in someone other than you. This sense of control is absolutely crushed on side F because they do not receive this, because if they do not receive this reward in their lifetime, or if they receive a punishment, it is seen as very harmful for the individual because they will not have this continued devotion that we see on our side of the house. Lastly, because being selfish is quite a common thing in our society, it's important to note that these bring you immediate improvements in your life. And when you do these selfish things, people think that benefits come from this. You are seeing this as an approval from God to continue doing these things, and that's okay, when actually, in actuality, it is not. So what are the outcomes of this? People base their worth in their life, whether they're on a high and a low at a time, which means that when things go badly, you don't just have to cope with what's going badly at that time for you. You also have to cope with this huge pressure of, oh my goodness, now I'm going to get a bad sign from God, and this is a bad sign from God, and that's really awful for me, because obviously I value God a lot if I've got this strong relationship with Him and I'm deeply religious. This can mean one of two things, depending on how religious someone is. As I've told you, we think that the second outcome is more likely when you're deeply religious, because that's what this debate actually applies to, but I'll go through both either way. So firstly, if you're not so religious in life and the ups and downs of the world, we see a consistent view of acceptance in our side. The times that we see people actually turning to God is for hope in dire situations. So if they are looking for rewards in their life and a sign of hope, and if these don't come, this can actually be very harmful for the individual. Whereas if you are taught the rewards come after in life, it continues this devotion with that consistent hope. For someone in these vulnerable situations where they are looking to this higher being, it is extremely harmful to have this unstable disappointment. Secondly, for the people who are deeply religious, on Af's side, we see them now being consistently focused on things as supposed signs rather than actually living their life. This means that you begin to doubt religion or think that you've done something wrong. This builds an unhealthy relationship with the God or the higher being, as you're consistently thinking, what have I done wrong? Or why am I a bad person? Why is this all happening to me? This is awful for the individual, as these strongly religious people base their life off religion. So when you see this is so unstable, and when the foundation of who you are, which religion is for these types of people, it is actually very, very detrimental to the individual. This strong relationship is being impacted, and it hugely impacts the basis of their life, and that is super harmful to them and their family. Now onto my second point around incentives and impacts of devotion. A bit of context here is religion causes people to subvert selfish nature of humanity in order to get further rewards down the track. So why is the afterlife far more compelling? Firstly, on scale, afterlife is infinitely longer, as kind of common sense, than people's time on Earth. This means the benefit is cosmically larger. Alternatively, the threat of not achieving this reward is much more powerful, because the question is no longer, if I do this selfish action, it will result in hell or something, as opposed to, if I do this action, will the future me be harmed? We see these two things as very different, and one is much more impactful. We see much greater incentives on our side of the house to continue this devotion, which we have told you, which both sides have agreed that we want in this debate. So what are the outcomes? Firstly, is you're far more likely to be devoted towards your religion. You do things like volunteering at the soup kitchen, or you do things like showing up to church every Sunday. We have agreed these are good things. I don't need to step through this because Af so kindly did it for me, but we are actually getting this on our side of the house. Additionally, now people opt into religion in the first place with this eternal reward, much more of an incentive. And also, if you look at the fear aspect, which is still vital in this, you do see a huge intuitive comparison of having that internal punishment. Yes, I would take this POI before I go on to my further outcomes.
If people struggle to control their impulses for a reward a couple days away, why would a significant amount of people control their impulses for a possible benefit a lifetime away?
We think that when people when they're thinking about controlling their impulses, if they're thinking that every single action in this earth that they have will have an immediate response, we think this doesn't actually have such a good impact, because they're currently looking for signs now that are not actually in the world, or they're trying to read into things that aren't actually as they are. We think there's continued devotion, and we think this lifelong thing is a much stronger incentive, and we also think that it enables the person to live their life without a fear of someone looking over their shoulder the whole time. Now continuing with my impact. So now this means that we have more people in religion, and this means a stronger devotion. Therefore, we have more people engaging in their outwardly religious practices, which we have both conceded is beneficial. Religious practices are generally for the greater good of humanity, focusing on concepts around kindness and forgiveness, which we need more of in the world. Note here, I'm directly combating Af's material here. When they say that they get these responses as a result of people doing these actions, this is the result of people doing the actions, which we have told you we actually get better on our side. This is not because of the teaching. The teaching is the thing that gets the incentive. Incentives result in the actions. That's not what we're debating. We are debating about the incentive. We have told you why we've won the incentive. That's why we have already got the better results in the actions that we both clearly want. By the end of the speech, what have I told you? I've explained why Af's form of reward and punishment creates an unstable and unhealthy relationship to religion, and why the afterlife incentive creates a much stronger incentive that results in better devotion for religion, which is what we want, which is why the moot should fall.
I think it is important to clarify what this kind of religion looks like. It does not look like someone doing an action, then searching for omens and signs of whether or not that action was good. What it looks like is, I have a religious doctrine that tells me it is nice to be kind to people. After I do something that is kind to people, inherently as a human, I am now looking for my reward. I am going to notice that. Secondly, we've given about 5 different mechanisms of why that reward is probably likely to come, right? What this means is, then on the, when you do a good action and then something bad happens to you, we simply just don't think people really notice that and don't really take it into account, or think that it is probably because of actions they have done in the past that are bad. We think this is really important to set up. We think the basis of this is not the signs, the basis of this is the religious doctrines, and because of the way the human brain works, right, of pattern recognition and confirmation bias, which we just know are true, we think that the omens and signs fit into what we already understand the world to look like. What am I going to do in this debate? Firstly, we're just going to touch on a couple sort of loose bits of rebuttal. Then we're going to get to 2 big ideas of whether or not the afterlife or current things is like a better motivator, and then this idea of like comfort, right? Okay, let's talk about this random rebuttal. Let's just start with like selfish things bring benefits. I think we've basically rebutted that at the intro of just like you do something selfish, you're not looking for good things happening to you, you're noticing the bad things happening to you. This can be like as simple as just like a car drives by and sprays you with water. Suddenly you think that's like comeuppance from God. It's pattern recognition. This is basic human psychology. Secondly, like I think that people just don't like you if you're selfish, because like no one likes selfish people. We think very quickly you get a bad response. I think we have heard that, like we heard that at first. I don't think we've actually heard like response to that specifically, right? Okay. Then let's talk about this idea of like you have a bad relationship with God. This is unstable. You're constantly having to do good things to like appease this God. This is bad. This is really, really good. We love people doing good things. We want people to be constantly doing good things. Secondly, the alternative to that is like eternal damnation for doing bad things. I think at the point you do one like bad action or think one bad thought and then you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get tortured in hell for the rest of my life, you probably have a negative relationship with God. We honestly think that this is like at best for us, worse for them, at best for them symmetrical, right? Finally, we've had this idea that like extremism will still happen because like they'll get like, yeah, extremism will still happen. I think we just have to like reframe this, right? The calculation has changed because as an extremist, I think I am going to get a reward if I like put myself in harm's way for something I think is religiously good. At the point in which like I think that rewards come like that there's not this great afterlife that's such a big reward to me, I am more happy just to be like a low-key religious person and just do like generally good things. And then secondly, like I think at the point in which extremists who keep on like giving up their life for this religion get shot, they're probably like, this probably isn't in line with like what we want, right? Okay, why is the afterlife not a good motivator? Why is like this quick sort of response better, right? The first thing is it's really far away. Like this is the POI response. This is just really, really far away, okay? I think, again, we've shown that, like, humans don't actually understand, like, aren't very good at controlling their impulses, especially when it's this far away. I don't think that's very important. Secondly, and I think this is what really, like, tips it over the edge for us, it's, like, inherently supernatural. Like, I don't know, I still can't wrap my idea around the idea of, like, infinity. Like, the afterlife is still inherently supernatural, and a thing that you, like, is way, way harder to like rationally prove. We think at the point in which like all of this exists, it means that like these people, when they're trying to justify these actions of doing really bad things, or like even just doing good things, it means that like they just don't think it's going to happen. I think we get more actions, good actions. Even if you don't believe this, I think we've given really clear reasons that because this feedback loop exists, right, of like doing actions, because the feedback loop exists, you are therefore more likely to get religions that are focused on actions, right? Because they're more likely to get like a positive feedback loop, they're more likely to get these affirmations, right? This means that we think on their side, it's more likely that these religions are going to be belief-based religions, right? We think that this means, even if you don't buy everything that we've said, we think that probably all of their benefits get mitigated to a certain extent because it's belief-based, right? And they don't actually get good actions. So what do they get then, right? They've told us that they get this idea of like comfort, right? I'd like to note, like, right, that at the point in which you believe we get mostly belief-based, this is like their whole push. This is what their case really centers around, right? Is that like you get comfort from things. Firstly, I think we can just outweigh this to a certain extent because we think stopping people like throwing their lives away and having a really sad time because they like want to be a nun, or like people actually hurting others in the name of religion, I think is inherently just like harmful. I think we can to a certain extent weigh that out. But then secondly, I think to mitigate, like we think firstly, people, this idea of like, oh, I feel really sad because I'm having a bad life, right? I think firstly, people think what a good life is like based on the lives they see around them. So inherently this life has to be like, you know, the bottom 5% of lives in the area. We think inherently at that point, or something along the lines of that, we think inherently at that point, it also we weigh it less because like it's just a small amount of people. But this is my extension, and I think this is what's really, really important. Like, let's say you're like, you know, you're basically Job, right? And your whole family has died, okay? the idea that like, hey, it's all right, go and live another 50 years and by then you'll be able to get to heaven, right? Or the idea that like, hey, it's okay, we are going to be able to change this, you can do good actions and you can have a better life, your life is going to get better, as opposed to like, this is just out of your control, bro. Go 50 more years and then life will be fine. The point in which there is agency, the point in which you have control over your own life, the point in which things can be changed for the better is the point in which you actually have like comfort. I'll take a PY if you have any. Cool, okay. Let's step back then and like see what we have here. I think we've dealt with like a bunch of the rebuttal that's pointed at like made little holes, but I think fundamentally we still have a standing that on their side they get more belief-based religions and we get more action-based religions simply because it's just like we think just we weigh action-based as being much better. I think we've stepped through all of that. Secondly, I think we've proven that like even when they do get this like action or they do get this worse belief, they just get worse of a motivation for it because we don't think the afterlife is strong. We think where they do get really strong motivation because of the afterlife is for doing really heinous, really like horrible things or just stuff that's like not that good for society, not that good for people's lives, right? Then finally, we have all of these points about comfort. We think we've at best relatively mitigated that, and I think at best for them, we've relatively mitigated it. At best for us, I think we've proven that actually we are the only side with comfort because we are the only side that can offer agency. We are the only side that can say life can get better for you. I think it is at that point we win this debate.
Note the tension in Affirming's case, that on one side these incentives are so unproximate that you do not do positive things, but they are also so much of a threat that you're willing to like bomb places so that you are able to get you are able to get eternal life. I don't think that both things can be true, and obviously that means that one of their things doesn't stand. I'm going to do two things in this debate. Firstly, I'm going to look at the small scale, where I think the heart of this debate probably lies on individual actions. And secondly, I'm going to look at extremism. So firstly, on individual actions and the kind of feedback loop that's been talked about. I think that at the top of this, the inherent thing is that people will see good things happening to them because of good things. However, the issue with this is I think people are more willing to see the bad things that are happening in their life for three reasons. Firstly, because there is people are conditioned to have negativity bias because there is a greater fear of losing things and of bad things happening than of good things happening to them. But secondly, I think these things are just more frequent, like especially when you are trying to do virtuous things and you are prioritizing others, good things happening to you are just less frequent, right? Because when you try and prioritize others, when you let someone do things over yourself, obviously it is less like things that happen to you that are good are less frequent. But thirdly, I think there's just like the harms of something bad happening are more impactful, right? When you lose your house, when someone dies to you, you don't get that scale of an incredible benefit in pretty much all aspects of your life. And so I think that probably means more willing to see the bad things which are happening. I also think that and they don't really respond to this. You'll be rewarded for the worst things that you do, right? Because you often gain things in life by being selfish, by prioritizing yourself. That's what often gives you good outcomes, right? And they try and say, oh, but you might not have friends. But I think if you are someone that wants to prioritize yourself, you search for justification, right? You search for thinking that you are a bad person, and the harm that has is you just continue doing these bad things because you think, I'm still wealthy, so I must be a good person, but meanwhile you're like an oil person that's doing really bad things for the planet or whatever. I also think for you to buy their material, good actions need to always lead to good results, right? The burden for them to prove this point to sufficiency is incredibly high because you get thrown out from one thing happening, right? Because one bad thing happens to you after having done great things for like 4 months and you have no clue what's happening. This spins you into a cycle of chaos where you are confused about religion. You're confused about your core identity. That is horrific. On our side, what you think is good is just based on religious values, right? Doing good, kind unto others. Prioritizing others on yourself. And I think that those things are just far more easy to understand because obviously they're in church incentives to communicate these in an easy and understandable way. Kate's material on over-analysis still stands, right? Because this is the only way in which, because this is the way that where you are likely to feed more into things. Because when you do care strongly about religion, that is the framing under which you see the world. So you over-analyze every part of your life to see how it is impacted on that, right? And their own analysis proves this. They say you're going to get splashed by a car on the road and suddenly go, well, I'm a bad person. That's likely to happen to you every single day, right? Which just sends you into an element of chaos. You get cut off on the road, you wonder what you have done wrong. They also say you just have the capacity to change because of these things. But I think firstly, this just flat out doesn't occur. And I think that when this change doesn't occur, when you're still in poverty in 10 years, you just get really confused. You think either you're a bad person or you flat out really leave religion. But I think secondly, it means that you don't improve your personal circumstance because you think it will naturally happen to you because you're doing virtuous things. It probably just leads to a better life for you as an individual. At the end of this point, I think that you either find these things confusing, right? Which means that you can't use them to inform your actions because if you have something good happen to you, there is a wide amount of things that could have caused that to happen. When something bad happens to you, there's a wide amount of things you can point to that cause that. It's unclear how you action this kind of thing on their side of the house. But alternatively, you just flat out realize the inconsistencies within your life and ditch religion, right? You no longer believe these things. I think that's a terrible outcome on their side of the house. I think only on our side do you get consistent feedback by the teachings of the church. I think the weighing on our incentives material, though, is that this is the only way to get more skeptical people to engage with religion in the first place. But then that's why the skeptical nature of their case is so harmful. I think most people aren't willing to buy into theological things. The way people change how they live their lives are most drastic when they go from no religion to religion, when they gain some of those fundamental values. That's the biggest difference in this debate. And it's only such a large need to change your life that does this, because, and secondly, I think this is the only benefit to, benefit non-believers, right? Because you're more likely to do things like being virtuous, right? You're more likely to do things like volunteering and consistently have that be your framing, not some unconfusing things. Because when you are unsure what happens, you stop volunteering at the church kitchen because you're just unsure if that's what you should do. But I'd like to weigh some of the stuff on why this is so detrimental to their case. So I think firstly, people that are not ordinary religious people turn to it when they are the most desperate. And it's just statistically when it is most highly likely that something goes wrong, right? People start praying when they are in hospital rooms, and those are the times you are most likely to see bad things happen to you. And this is when religion is needed the most, right? When it is the most guiding to people's lives, it most gives you a purpose. But I think secondly, those that are religious place their identity on how in this, and I think that having to pivot to not being religious is terrible for people's well-being. On extremism, and note how much of a stretch this is, right? Because Christianity is dominant in New Zealand, which has a thing about an afterlife, and you don't see people going to like blow up places or whatever. I think this is highly speculative. But firstly, I think there are incentives on the church to avoid this, right? A, in terms of perception, and B, just in terms of longevity. Obviously, when you have people blowing things up, that's obviously bad for you continuing as a church. But I think secondly, you probably also want the rewards on their side, right? Because if you are so irrational that you think it is God's will to start, committing war crimes, you probably are likely to do it to benefit your own life, right? And if you think it's God's will, it will help you. But I think this is actually worse on their side, right? Because this kind of thing is likely to come from uncertainty, right? Because when you think that you are doing wrong, you slowly get more and more desperate to improve your standing with God. And they are the only side that gets feedback based on your actions. And so the random nature of when you get information is likely to cause this kind of desperation. The vast majority of people aren't religious extremists though, and the places that thrive in are probably already in war. And so therefore I think that it is probably likely to happen under both sides, but more so caused by their own desperation. We flip that point, so proud to negate.
I think the reason this debate has become a little difficult to watch is because we both sort of sat here like slewing mechanisms at each other about how we have the capacity to change behaviour for the better, but the other side doesn't have the capacity to change behaviour for the better, but they've low-key been the same mechanisms. But I think that what we can all probably agree on is that religion is fairly powerful and should to some extent have a capacity to change the behaviour of the people who are in it. Like, we had really great mix from our side about how you really devoutly believe. We had great like Sunday school mix from First on the other side. At the end of the day, you probably believe that people's behaviour is changed by religion, at least to some degree. This means that the side that wins is the side that is able to explain to you why we get the religion's behaviour being better, right? Like the behaviour we're trying to move people towards being better for society. We are going to explain why that is, mainly through the framing of the fact that it is probably better for society to get people to like do things than sit there and think about how much they love God. We think that's something they haven't sufficiently engaged with, perhaps because they haven't understood our case and it hasn't been perhaps pushed as strongly as it could. But what we think this really does look like is fundamentally the difference between thinking a lot, navel-gazing all of the time, versus actually trying to create positive action, which we think is really powerful. I've got 3 points of clash here. I've got the main substantive push of their case. If they were going to win, I think this is where it would be, which is on vulnerable people and comfort and how important it is for them. Then I've got our main substantive push regarding extremism, which is what I weigh the most highly in the debate. And then finally, I've got good actions, and basically like who gets more general good actions. I've put this last fundamentally because I think both of us have given good weighting as to why we think specific points of clash are the most important, and those are the first two. And yeah, I'll take a POI.
What religious doctrine that says you should go blow up a church compared to the vast majority of religions which will lead people, if extremists, to do things like radical kindness, like radically doing good for other people?
Yeah, so what I think our response here is mainly the fact that we're actually just taking away power from the ones which say go blow people up on your side of the house. Sorry, on our side of the house, because the main incentive to blow people up is I'm going to get good things happening in the afterlife. If the afterlife doesn't exist, your rewards have to come now, then the only possible way you could get your good things happening is if you're actually doing good things throughout your life. Like, I don't know, maybe you get a really great last 10 milliseconds as you hit the detonator, but most people probably don't weigh that highly. And so the dominant force is going to be people doing like fairly good things throughout the rest of their life. I think that actually works quite well in the last point of clash, but still, I'm going to stick with my structure. So, vulnerable people. They've given us their main substantive push being that basically it's hope, it can get better. We've given you 2 substantive pushes and responses to this, but then I think some of their best material came out from Sam, and it's basically the idea that you've been lied to, right? I think this could be really strong, but I think it failed to analyze the actual results upon society, right? So yes, it could be bad if you've been lied to, but ultimately we think, let's say you're really poor, you do a bunch of great things for 10 years, and then you go, oh my god, my life hasn't gotten any better. Sam said you stop being religious. Okay, we actually don't think that's that bad for society, right? If you do great things for 10 years and then stop being religious, so what? Soup kitchens had employees for 10 years. That's actually really great for society. That one person's feelings wasn't weighed sufficiently at second to be debate winning, and actually at the end of the day, we don't think it can be, because all of the homeless people who now get meals, everyone who has a better interaction with you, every single time which you choose to do a better thing rather than a worse thing over those 10 years really adds up. We make thousands of decisions every day. If even just for a short time these people are living a better life, we think that it probably makes society better. Secondarily, we think there's the other possibility that you double down, right? It's totally possible that you decide, oh my gosh, I need to be an even better person, right? We're all totally a little bit evil. We think you can probably look back and go, oh, it was probably X, Y, and Z that I did that means I'm not doing this. Let me double down, be even more radical kindness. Hell, that's even better for the world. So actually, we think both of the outcomes there from their good material are probably better for our side of the house. And then secondarily, just to rework the responses we gave on hope, we think hope probably isn't that good when you have to look 80 years ahead, right? Particularly if everything has been going bad for you for 5 years and every day feels difficult, right? Just waking up and deciding, oh my gosh, I'm going to do things today is really difficult. And 80 years' time when you die isn't as strong as in maybe 5 years' time, right? Secondarily, we think autonomy is really important, right? When everything in society is rigged against you, it's probably really great to believe that there is some cosmic power which is going to have your life turn out better because of what you're doing. So at the end of this point of clash, we think we probably have better results for vulnerable people, better comfort, which, as I've said, is probably their main substantive push. And if they can't win that, they can't win the debate. And we successfully flipped it. So next, let's go on to extremism. I think this one's pretty quick, but fundamentally, we think the reason we win this point of clash is because I don't think they've sufficiently understood that what we're talking about is when you take away the afterlife incentive, you're taking away the primary way which people are convinced to do the extremism. Now, we gave you reasons at first why we think extremism is generally bad, and it doesn't necessarily have to look like Al-Qaeda. It could also look like people just giving up productive potential. Maybe I'm too much of an economist, but people giving up the possible things they could give to society to go and become a nun. And so we think that ultimately if we can explain to you that the primary thing of have a bad life for a great afterlife is gone, the only possible way to get your reward is have a good life, i.e. action-based religion, not belief-based religion, we get less extremism. We weigh this extremely highly because even if we do lose the other points of clash, it's really difficult for us to understand, but I want you to think of it, just how bad it is for your country to be ravaged by religious warfare, right? If you have your country ravaged by religious warfare, that means you can never develop, right? You can never receive any of the possible things in society which is supposed to make your life better. We think this is really bad. Even one suicide bombing is really bad. That hurts hundreds of people, second order effects thousands of people. We think that's not something they can accept on their side of the house we don't think this is something that happens on our side of the house because once again, we're removing an incentive. Even if you believe there are other reasons extremism happens, we think that this is a large incentive. This is why they say, glory to God when they do it. All of that kind of thing on our side of the house is a significant incentive removed. And so actually, if we're removing a significant incentive for a really bad thing to happen, so that bad thing happens less, that is debate-winning material for us. It's really important. Finally, look, good actions. Okay. We've had a huge amount of crosstalk on this, but ultimately, I don't think it's important as the other points of clash, and it mainly comes down to is the world good or is the world bad, but I don't think their response is engaged with our principal mechanism, which is confirmation bias. So we gave you 3 reasons as to why we think the world is generally good, primarily these psychology things, that you like doing good things, we're generally kind of nice people sometimes, and also that other people like you, right? You do good things, you're not a dick, and then you have better interactions with everyone else, all of that snowballs, so the world probably rewards you. The only thing we actually heard from this is that the world is selfish for some reason. I don't broadly believe that. Secondarily, they've told us that the afterlife is a strong motivator. I don't think this responds to our material because what we've told you is the afterlife is a strong motivator, but not to act. The afterlife is not a strong motivator for you to do good actions because you're not getting the reward right now. It's not as visceral, it's not as immediate. We think that's really important and shows that we have a much stronger incentive for the good actions in our side of the house. But finally, the confirmation bias, which I think is really important, and I'd just like to make out for you quite clearly. Fundamentally, like, we're quite suspicious people. We also, for some reason, seem to believe in zodiac signs. The reason that stuff like that works, and like tarot card readings like that works, is because as soon as we believe something, we do every kind of mental gymnastics we have to make everything else fit into that. That means that if you believe you have been a good person because your religious text says you have been, that means that everything in society tells you, whatever it actually says, you think it means you've been a good person. Equally, if you think you've been a bad person because of X, Y, Z, everything in society, you believe it means you've been a bad person. This confirmation bias means that whatever religious texts are telling you on our side of the house, it's probably a strong incentive to actually do that, because we've all agreed that for the most part, apart from Al-Qaeda, religion is broadly positive. We think that's an important thing on our side of the house, and we get better actions. Thank you very much.
We win this debate when we prove to you that devotion is a good thing and that we get more of it on our side of the house without the exclusive harms on our side. Okay, so the main points of question in this debate, firstly on affirmation and secondly on actions and the result of these actions. Firstly, on affirmation. I've told you a lot about how on their side they're going to get these affirmation for their actions and that's going to make them feel good and everything. They claim that people will look for omens that reinforce their actions and religions. Couple of responses to this. First of all, this means that people will also look for or see negative omens, which we tell you are infinitely more harmful for two reasons. First of all, it ruins your relationship with the religion, which we tell you is really important because the way that you relate with your religion obviously influences your actions, and both teams in this debate have told you that we do care a lot about the actions of the individual. Secondly, it causes desperation, which is more likely to result in the religious terrorism and bad actions that you tell us are really bad, because obviously if a person is getting all these things and omens that tell them that they're a horrible person, they're going to go out and be more desperate to try and prove themselves to their religion to get all these benefits that you tell us they really want in the short term. Secondly, they claim to you that people will now believe in action-based religion because their lives change for the better. First of all, we tell you that action-based religion becomes a bad thing when it's conditional. So when religion becomes conditional, it means that you are constantly trying to do every little tiny thing to try and prove yourself to your religion. And when you don't get the result you want, that makes you feel disenfranchised with your religion, which can result in negative actions that make you more desperate. Again, it can also change for the worse. This causes all the harms that you brought out about people being desperate or doing bad things for their religion. We tell you that it's actually far worse on your side, because if people are constantly being told without 100% accuracy what they're doing, this ties back to Sam's material. You can't 100% of the time get a result for the action you're creating, and it's not always going to be interpreted in the way that you want, right? So that means that sometimes you might interpret it wrong, then go out and do an action that's not positive for the world and society, right? They also claim to you that people don't notice bad omens or don't care about them. First of all, this is so not true and very assertive. We tell you that bad omens are not only noticeable, they're more noticeable than good ones. This causes the desperation we talked to you about. Why are they more noticeable than good ones? Obviously, it is human nature to notice the negative in things. It's sad and it's unfortunate, but it is true. It takes 3 positives to combat every negative, because we look for the bad things in life. which sounds like really dark, but it is true, and they like look worse and they influence your emotions far more than positive ones, right? When you have a negative emotion, you like don't think rationally, whereas when you're having a positive emotion, which happens less of the time, you are going to think rationally. They also tell you about like confirmation bias, which was one of their biggest pushes. Confirmation bias, this whole idea actually works in our favour because we tell you that when you're confirmed for doing bad things, this makes you again more desperate. And I don't see how confirmation bias actually like works on their side, because again, if you're like, they're saying that confirmation bias basically helps when you do a good thing and you're like rewarded for it in a good way. What if you do a good thing and you're not rewarded for it? What is that going to make you think? Did I do a wrong thing? Or like, was it not good enough? Do I need to do more? Oh, yes I do. I need to be more desperate. This causes the things like religious terrorism because you want to like get extreme results in your life. Because if you don't believe in the afterlife, obviously the only benefits you're going to get are now, so you're more desperate to get those benefits and to like get things that work for you. This causes so much more desperation, which is why we think we get more positive affirmation on our side of the house, and the affirmation that they're getting actually causes more harms than benefits. Secondly, on actions. They tell you that when something really bad happens, for example, like a family member dying, you are able to like make it better, and like therefore you have like agency or something. First of all, on our side, you understand two things. First of all, that it's like not your fault, so you don't need to feel horrible about this thing that's happened to you and blame yourself for every tiny thing that you did. For example, if your entire family dies and like on their side of the house, you think that's your fault because you believe in the idea that like this is confirmation for your actions, how is that going to make you feel, especially in relation to your religion? Probably not very good, which again ties into the whole desperation thing that we talked to you about. Secondly, you understand that you will like get paid back later on. So it makes it seem like less of a really horrible thing if your family member dies, because you know that later on in the afterlife maybe you'll see them again, or maybe you'll get all these like rewards and stuff that are actually going to make it better. On their side, it's so much more damning and so much more desperate. Secondly, on their side, for this agency point to have any standing in this debate, you have to buy that a person has motivation to do good things, to like try and get back some good results. However, like we've told you, when something really bad happens, that's like really bad for your emotions, right? If your entire family dies, I struggle to understand how you're going to have so much motivation to go out and do good in the world. You're probably just dealing with your grief. You probably aren't going to go out and be like super charitable and stuff so that you can try and change your situation for the better. Especially when like your family member supposedly on your side is like not going to come back and there's no way to undo this harm. We tell you that this is far less likely than someone like either turning against their religion, which results in like the terrorists or extremes, or like totally giving up on their religion because they blame themselves and because it's not working in their favour. They claimed that if you stop being religious in 10 years, who cares? First of all, this is not only happening to one individual. The points that we gave you apply to many, which means on a large scale, we get less devotion and get less benefits to society. It's not one person who's going to feel disenfranchised from their religion and quit. We've told you this applies to so many people because it's not like a one-person conditional thing that someone has a life that's up and down. We tell you what lives look like. This is from Frame here. People's lives are very complex. There are up and down periods, and interpreting these signs as signs is harmful because then you're constantly basing your life off an interpretation of what you think you are doing. On their side, there are periods where you think you are like in and out of God's favour, which means that your relationship with your religion is so much more strenuous. On our side, it's so much more consistent, and the results are like the rewards are much higher. This creates a religion of like blaming yourself, blaming others, blaming your religion itself, and like moral high ground as well. Because we tell you if you think you're like doing all these amazing things, you are so much better than everyone else, which can lead to like desperate acts or making yourself think you're so much better than everyone else. Yes.
Yeah, if I've done a bad thing and then go searching for omens and go, oh my god, there's a bad omen, God doesn't like me, isn't that fairly good for me to now realise I've done a bad thing and should change my ways?
No, I don't see it happening like that, because if you do a bad thing, then you might actually get a positive omen. We tell you that like the accuracy of like the affirmation on your side is not as like good as you would have it think. If you do a good thing and you get a bad omen, that means you stop doing those good things. And if you do a bad thing and you get a good omen, that means that you keep doing those bad things, which results in like the religious terrorism that we talked to you about. This only happens when someone does a bad thing and it's like supposedly affirmed by their religion, so they keep doing it. I don't imagine many religions actually do support like bombing, right? It's when somebody like does a bad thing, like bombing, like not like bombing, but like, you know, actually a shooting or something, and they get it like affirmed, and therefore they think that's a good thing and in their favour of their religion. That only happens on your side of the house. So what does this look like at the end of the debate? We tell you that our side is much more consistent and doesn't result in all of these super strenuous harms, and the relationship that a person has with their religion is so much more strong on our side, which we tell you is so important because the relationship that you have with your religion directly ties into your actions, which both teams agree are the most important thing in this debate. We get much more consistent actions, much less harmful actions on our side of the house, whereas they get much more harmful actions, much more desperation, and a really strenuous relationship with your religion, which is horrible, which is why we're in this debate.
Three things to do in reply. Firstly, on extremism. Secondly, on how people interpret information. And finally, on what you do with it. Firstly, on extremism. I'd like to note the very high burden they've set themselves up on this debate. There is a tangible change to the amount of things which happen. I think it is quite a speculative thing, which is very hard to prove. But I think that when things go wrong, you get more and more desperate, right? Which uniquely turns people who would have already lived a normal life towards these things like extremism. Out of desperation, out of why is everything gone wrong? I think that's far more compelling. But I think that those that currently do it, either A, are so irrational, they buy into the benefits they get from it anyway, it either will help them, even if they go to jail, they live a lucky life, or they, their family is prosperous, they benefit those around them. Or, alternatively, in a war environment that makes you think that extremism is okay, you probably have to engage with it anyway. If you're in a war environment, you probably don't have a lot of mobility. And importantly, that means that the afterlife isn't the tipping point, right? Because you don't have the capacity to say no at the point in time you're in a place like Afghanistan. I don't think there's a lot of mobility. They say that this looks like good things, there's an opportunity cost. But I think radical kindness and radical selfishness isn't a bad thing. It's very utilitarian. But more so, if the worst case of this is you become a nun, I think nuns probably feel pretty content with their life. They feel very content. I think that's probably not too bad. So either you buy the people that are engaging in extremism don't have the capacity to not do it on their side, or alternatively, you get more extremism, which I think stems from desperation. But how people interpret information, I think on our side, they just do it the simple way. They buy into church's messaging, which is likely to be done in a way which is easy to interpret, which is consistent. I think this survives during the worst time, right? It helps you interpret what you should do with your actions. Their own examples mean that you are continually paranoid. The examples in terms of things like getting cut off on the road, having a pole splashed into you, were incredibly unstrategic, because it means the scale on which you overthink these things, as Kay explains to you with wanting to be able to seek the meaning of things, obviously means that you overinterpret them to a detrimental level, right? And I also think these things, and at the end of this, it means these things are very inconsistent, because because at the point in time in a day where a good thing happens to you and a bad thing happens to you, you have no idea what's going on, right? I think that those who are doing good are likely already good within a religious environment, likely already do good on our side, which means that it has a marginal benefit on this debate, right? So I think that they might get slightly better, but the chance of them drastically changing what they do to a worse environment is very high. What do people do with this information though? Because I think only good people examine through the lens of them being a bad person. Because it is inherently likely they are already doing good, and they likely perceive the signs around them that they are doing badly. Whereas if you're a selfish person that is self-centered, you probably only look through the lens of, wow, I'm a good person, look through all these things I have gained through my selfishness. I think that the most important thing in this debate, though, is that losing your religion is likely when it happens on a large scale. Everyone stops caring about values greater than themselves. Because maybe the soup kitchen, losing one person doesn't matter, but when it loses 10,000 people, because everyone stops caring about religion, that's detrimental. The most vulnerable people are those going through hard times, though. And those are the most likely to be screwed because bad things happening are imminent to them. Even if you buy, some people now do less nice things, those are not the most vulnerable people in this debate compared to what we tell you they are.
I think the singular most important mech in this debate is the confirmation bias mech. I think realistically we have a better chance of winning without it than Neg does, but I think also fundamentally we just win it. 3 things we're going to do in this speech: 3 points of clash, extremism, vulnerable people, and like comfort, and then like who incentivise good actions. I'm just going to start with this extremism one. I think we can get this out of the way very quickly, right? Basically, they've used our mix for encouraging actions to say that encourages bad actions, right? This is fine, right? They've also said that like our confirmation bias encourages like non-religious actions leading to this. I think what all of this misses is a very clear mech we've had all the way down the line, that it doesn't, the prospect of losing your life for a reward that you only get inside of your life just makes absolutely no sense. There is no possible way, and that logically makes sense, that you want to lose your life for a reward you receive in your life. It just doesn't compute. We weigh this incredibly highly because of the severity of the impact. We think that this is debate winning. Okay. Vulnerable people and comfort, right? I think there's been 2 main pushes inside of this area from both teams. We've had agency from our side, and we've had this idea of like, you give up on religion, you lose your religious faith. To be honest, I think that like there hasn't been any like proper like flipping rebuttal on either of these points. I think most of it has been mitigation, right? I think most of like the mitigation that we've heard was like at third neg, or like proper response that we've heard has been like at third neg and shouldn't be weighed highly. And I think that the most response that we've heard earlier at, which is fine, is that like this is outweighed by the idea of giving up, right? I think we've done better response to this idea of giving up because we've said that like there's 2 options from this. People double down, leading to even better results, better actions, or secondly, they just have like 10 years of good deeds. That's really good. No, we've also done mitigation to this because we have said, like this hasn't been responded to, that there generally just like aren't many people who have a really bad life. We think that this like, if you do believe that this is like a harm for them, that's been mixed out by the way. If you believe that this is a harm for them, you just don't really believe it's a huge one, right? Okay, now that we've set all of that up, can we talk about like the big clash of this debate about like good actions, right? Okay, what have we said on our side? I think we've set up this like positive feedback loop that's like got a bunch of like mix around it, right? And I think what we have like heard in response to this, again, is like fine, is this idea of like selfishness leads you to like doing well, this breaks the confirmation loop, and then like you'll see good omens when you do bad things, or vice versa, and this like breaks this loop, doesn't make sense, leads to a bunch of bad things. I think again we've stressed down the line, we've said this at first, we've said this at second, we've said this at third, that the way this works is you start with the idea that you are either a good person or a bad person based off religious doctrine. You then go and confirm that from the omens you see, right? I think we've given reasons why generally you're more likely to see these omens, like to see things that confirm it, but I think the most important factor is we have just said that you are looking for this confirmation. all of our points about confirmation bias, they have like kind of said that they can still get this confirmation bias, but what they've missed is it's confirming something you already believe. We have explained explicitly that the thing you already believe comes from your religious doctrine. Note this responds to a bunch of their stuff that they use, how they use this to like work on things on extremism, right? Okay, then like what have they said, right? I think they've said that the afterlife is like a really strong incentive, which it like is, right? Like it's people, like it's eternal happiness. I think what we've said is that like we just basically have mitigated this by saying like this is really, and I think this is really good mitigation, by the way, and really strong mitigation, we've said that this is really far away, and we've said that this is just like really hard to understand. I think at that point, we've given like a clear reason why this is good. But even if you believe them, that they do have good actions, what hasn't been responded to is that their good actions simply aren't as good as ours, because we get clear actions that affect more people because we have an action-based religion. We therefore get more good. That's really great. We win this debate.
That was very good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, God, we've had a long debate.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I think it's always like, it's good to end on like a high quality one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so true. So true.
100%.
In the reverse order, I
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, it's here the year.